was asked, can you talk about interdisciplinary research, what you actually do, how you relate it, and how you drive in sort of all these different sort of stories to make one big cohesive one. And it's a really sort of, it was sort of, oh, okay, that'll be really easy to do, right? Not at all. What I want to do today is really, I think the easiest way for me to do it is really go through some of the questions, some of the central things that have been really important to me as a scientist and have actually interrelated and allowed me to actually move forward and create the research program that I have now at UCA. And sort of where I need to actually start that, and if we go to the next slide, is really ask the question is what is the question for you guys, is what is the question that drives you? That's going to be the most important thing. And I think one of the key things as a scientist that you want to do and that you want to think about is really have a big question, have an overarching question that keeps you up at night. For example, last night I was asleep, nice and comfy, right? Next thing my schnauzer jumps on me. First thing I'm wondering, wait a minute, how do these particular genes work this way, right? This is the first thing. That's what you want to sort of end up being like. Okay, is having that kind of an idea. And for me, the question that drives me, that really gets me out of bed in the morning, is really how are molecular pathways conserved across species? And you sort of sit there and you go, man, that's a humongous topic. That's huge. But what is that? What is, for me, how do I break that down into smaller questions? Well, before I start, what I want to do is I want to sort of give you a little bit of a biography of how I got there and how I came to create this one particular question. So if I go to the next slide, where I grew up was I grew up in a little town, about 65,000 people, New Zealand's 6th largest city, right? And it's right sort of there in the middle of the North Island. You can see that red dot right over Rotorua. And what it means, it's a Māori word, it means second lake. Now if we go to the next slide, a couple of sort of nice pictures. It's actually very, very geothermal. We have a lot of geothermal activity, boiling mud, hot pools, all that kind of stuff. Usually a drunk person will fall into one once or twice a year. We also grew up on the edge of a big lake, and if you sort of look at the picture on the right-hand side, you can see this big natural lake. That's actually the rim of a volcano, okay, sitting there. And there's many, 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 many volcanoes. So, really interesting place to grow up. We also have a huge Māori population, which is a lot of sort of, the native New Zealanders as well. I grew up there, went to high school, everything normal, everything groovy. Never did biology. Biology sucked. I was a physicist. Physics is good, right? And chemistry, yay, rock on. And then what I decided, apparently across going to, and I'm just switching slides and clicking on the animation, is I actually moved from Rotorua to the closest university. In fact, I didn't even think I was good enough to go to university when I actually left high school. And I applied sort of as a cruel joke to my mother. And what happened was I got accepted. Don't ask me why, don't ask me how. But I went to the university that was actually closest to my home. There's only 7 universities in New Zealand. Okay, and this one was the one that was closest, it was brilliant, yay, rock on. And it was the University of Waikato. Next slide. While I was there, what I did was I ended up completing a Bachelor of Science and Technology, a 4-year degree. In New Zealand, all of our degrees are usually only 3 years long. Okay, so what happened was I made a decision to do a 4-year degree, which is called a Bachelor of Science and Technology. From there, I also decided to do a diploma, a postgraduate diploma in management studies, and from there, a Masters of Science and Technology. Sort of just moving slides on. Just one thing that I really wanted to highlight is that I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no freaking clue. None. No idea. And it's an idea to show you that you don't have to be completely focused all the way through your world. Okay? Really good example. When I first started at the University of Waikato, I took my very first biology class. Go me. Realised it was absolutely awesome. Okay? From there, I started pre-med because, of course, everybody wants to be a doctor, right? Midway through, and it's, by the way, for us, pre-med is 1 year. Okay, you go to medical school the next year in your sophomore year. Midway through the year, didn't like it, went, yeah, no, not for me. So what I did was I switched to a Bachelor of Science, a 3-year degree, double majoring in biology and chemistry, realised, hit physical chemistry, went, yuck, this absolutely sucks. Switched again to a Bachelor of Science in Technology, majoring this time in biology and management studies. Okay, so it's okay to change. And the other thing I want to point out is also notice I majored actually in animal physiology and genetics. Okay, so not plant biology. I'm the biggest plant, green, happy person at UCA, but notice my whole bachelor's and my master's were in animal physiology and genetics. Okay, then I saw the light. It was very green, but it was definitely the light. Along the way as well, I also did a couple of internships. And if you flip to the next slide, you can see those. The first one was for the New Zealand Forest Research Institute. Okay, it's now Skylin. And this was during the summer of my first year. So this is something very similar to what you guys are doing. Okay, this one internship, I can tell you right now, these two internships that I did were the reason that I got into PhD school eventually. Okay, those were the things that allowed me and drove me to do research. Okay, right off the bat. What I was doing during that first summer is I extracted an awful lot of DNA. It was 3 months of sitting there flicking test tubes and spinning them down. I extracted DNA solidly for 3 months. Character building. Okay. What we also did was we also collected a whole lot of pine needles. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but how you actually collect pine needles. The trees are really, really tall, just little branches sitting off the side. How you actually collect them is either you can get a ladder and just sort of clamp it up and climb up the tree and collect your needles, or you can do it the other way, which is you get a shotgun and you shoot the branches down. Okay, so I did a lot of that as well. You sort of think it's really cool, but after you fired, sort of 300-400 shot rounds out of a shotgun, your shoulder starts to fall off. So it wasn't quite fun. The second one that I did was actually for Tasman Forestry. I worked for an industry. And this was during the fall and the summer of my senior year. And what I did there was I actually got involved in a project DNA fingerprinting trees. Okay? So what we would do is I would actually go in. We had some very, very high value clones, particular trees. So in New Zealand, here's a question for any of you actually. Here's a quick question. If you look at all of New Zealand forestry industry, huge, like thousands or actually millions of trees, how many individuals do you think make it up? How many individual genotypes? Exactly, 8. Okay? The whole New Zealand forestry industry is 8 individuals. They're just cloned many, many, many times. So when we're looking for those high-value clones, what we'll do is it's really important to make sure that you know you have the tree you think it actually is. And so we worked on that a lot. I designed a whole lot of markers that were actually able to do that and sort of actually figured that out. And the other thing we did was we also actually worked on paternity pair testing trees. So what you would do is you'd actually work out, whose mummy was whose and whose daddy was whose, and make sure no milkman got in the mix, and just things like that. Okay, really sort of interesting story. The important thing though, and it's sort of an important point, is that up till then, I was like not probably one of the best students. I was probably very, very naughty, okay, as far as students go. It was just do the minimum amount of work, get through, skip through. And what I actually met my first mentor at that point. And her name, she actually worked at NZFRI. She rehired me at Tasman Forestry, and she also worked at the university where I was at. And she really took an interest in me. And she was, honestly, I can say this without a shadow of a doubt, she was one of the driving forces in moving me forward. She was one of those people where you could sit there and go, Marie, how does this work? And she'd go, and I'd be, oh, how does that happen? She knew everything, right? And I realized that that's how I wanted to be. That's how I actually wanted to grow up. Okay, so this was one of those key people, incredibly, incredibly bright. Flipping to the next slide, during my Master's of Science and Technology, so I started doing my Master's degree. I moved, there's an animation in here, I actually moved out to the coast and I worked for a company called Fletcher Forests. It was actually the largest forestry company in the world. It had all of the central North Island was in forest, but also half of Chile, right out all across into South America as well. Just flipping to the next slide. At Fletcher Challenge, what I actually ended up doing, and by the way, the sort of ocean beach view that you have, that was actually from my house. Okay, yeah, life was hard. I have a violin for myself somewhere. For a good sort of year or so. By the way, my Master's was in animal physiology and genetics. My thesis, however, was in forestry. Okay, and in particular, what I did was I looked at 7 types of DNA markers and I compared and contrasted them. Okay, that's what I actually did. Now, the goofy thing about this was that my mentor, Dr. Cornett, she actually moved away to America during this time, about 3 months into my thesis.